Today I'm here to bring to you, or to introduce to you, Michael Carey. Michael Carey is an instructor in the Organizational Leadership Department here at Gonzaga University. He also was last year under Father Coughlin, the chair of the Task Force for Racial Equality on campus, and that began his relationship with our keynote speaker, Lee Mun Wah. So I introduce to you Michael Carey.
Thank you. I'm here to introduce Lee Mun Wah, and I'd like to just give you a little background to how he has positively affected Gonzaga University in kind of preparing you to hear what he has to say to you today. Last year, as part of the task force on racial equality and cultural understanding at the university, we made the decision to show Lee Mun Wah's film, The Color of Fear, to the entire community here, faculty, administrators, and staff. After watching the film in 3 different locations on campus, we broke up into about 30 discussion groups. And as we got the notes back from the discussion groups, time and time again, what we heard was that the watching of the film, which is about an hour-and-a-half film, and the follow-up discussion conversation for more people than we were expecting was a kind of conversion experience regarding racial equality. That our campus is, as most of you are aware, predominantly white, and we had a kind of unconscious racism that was prevalent at the university that now suddenly became conscious as people watched the film and began to talk with each other about the ways that the white culture is seen as normal and the non-white culture is seen as other here at the university and in the Spokane community. So it was a provocative and controversial film that produced a tremendous amount of good here at the university. So I was asked to introduce Mun Wah to you. Just to give you a little background, he's been working for about the last 10 or so years in this area of racial prejudice and fear. He has done, he leads a couple of men's group, one Asian and one multicultural. He has produced 2 films so far and is working on 3 other films actually. And I wanted to give you a little background on those films before he comes up. The film that is most important to me is the one that we used at the university, The Color of Fear. He also, before that, had another film that he had produced and received significant critical acclaim for, which was called Stolen Ground. Both of these films deal with racial prejudice and fear. I might add also that those of you who have seen The Color of Fear, Mun Wah is planning to release, and he's working on right now, Color of Fear 2, catchy title, and Color of Fear 3. Color of Fear 2 is, there's about 23 hours that was not part of the original Color of Fear film of these men of different backgrounds discussing racial prejudice and fear. And so Color of Fear 2 is using some of that footage then to look at some of the other things that were talked about. Color of Fear 3 is taking again that same weekend conversation among these men that produced those Color of Fear 1 and 2, but they also had a conversation that dealt with homophobia, and that will be the subject of Color of Fear 3. So those will be coming out soon. He is also right now working on or getting ready to work on a film called Last Chance for Eden, in which he will bring together a group of men and women of color to talk in the same way about that as the Color of Fear worked, to talk about both sexism and racism in a wider context. So he is continuing his work, and I also am aware that he has been traveling over the last few years all over the country doing workshops on this topic. I'm very privileged to be able to introduce Lee Mun Wah to you, and I want to reiterate how much of a positive and constructive influence his film and his workshops at the university has had on this community. It really has been a landmark in our continuing development as a community of inclusion. And so I'd like you to welcome with me Lee Mun Wah.
Okay. One of the reasons why I never speak behind a podium is because I look a lot larger outside of them. Well, I think that that's quite important because of the myth that Asian men aren't tall. I remember once I was introduced at this university and a Filipino man said, the reason why I really like Lee Mun Wah is because he's as short as I am. And when I got up, I said, the reason why I like to work with Tacoca is because he's as tall as I am. I think that's quite an important perspective to begin to look at. One thing I was very struck with today was when we found out that 3 of the keynote speakers, the women, were unable to make it today. So what I'd actually like to propose is that there are at least three incredible keynote speakers that are women that are in this room.
Yeah.
I think it's very important that we begin to look at how we decide what is leadership in our country. Someone once asked me what was the definition of leadership, and I said, quite simple, it's a ship of leaders. I'd like you to think about what that concept is like. The idea that we say that every single person in a room is a leader. I'd like you to think about every time you're in your workplaces or your schools or your agencies, who does all the talking. I'd like to imagine there's probably about a good 20% or less that do all the talking continuously. What happens sometimes with that 20% or less, they begin to think that the other 80% don't have much to say. I just like to be followers. And the way you can break that type of cycle, and this is the way I do it in workshops and in meetings, is I often say to people, after the first half of the meeting, I say, well, I want to thank all the people who just spoken. Now, for the last half of the meeting, only those people who haven't spoken will be the ones who will be in charge of the rest of the meeting. I'd like you to think about what that concept would mean like in America today. What would it mean like if the president of a company, or the people who are the chairmen, or chairpersons of companies, if we had people co-facilitating and having shared leadership? That every time we had a meeting, a new group would come up and be the ones who led the meeting. What would happen in America today if instead of doing it by majority rules that we did things by consensus? What would that be like? What would it be like in America today if every person who walked into a company or agency knew they could be the president of that company? How much more effort would they would give out? I was very struck with what Bill was talking about, or Michael was talking about unconscious racism that was revealed here at Gonzaga. But actually, I would like to propose that racism is conscious of people of color for women every single day. The question is whether or not it is safe to talk about it. And safety is not an easy thing. Someone once asked me, as I was just getting ready to speak today, they asked me, and I told them that I was really nervous. And I really am. I'm nervous before I get ready to start. And I tell them, and I said to David, that the reason why I was so nervous was because, as a Chinese man, this was quite an effort for me to get out. I had no models for that. No models to stand up to speak. be listened and heard. That lack of model robbed me of a sense of self-esteem, of courage, a sense that I could make a mistake and still be loved and cared for. Another thing that's very important to me is the environment. Every time I began, someone asked me what I was doing over here earlier when I was at a corner of one of the doors. I don't know about you, but I need to see the sky. I need to see the outdoors. I need to see faces that smile at me before I begin. I need people to look at me. And what's important too is the journey that it takes to get here. I once did a conference recently in Minnesota, St. Paul, Minnesota, to a whole group of folks, about 300 folks that were in diversity work. And I said, I can guarantee you that nobody in this room knows what it's been like when you get to this room. In fact, I can guarantee that every single one of you who took a flight here already experienced racism. I want you to hear that. That even as I took my flight here, I experienced it again. How many times it's like when you get on an airplane, and the stewardess or the hostess on the plane, the host person on the plane, says hello to everybody, but when I walk up, changes the expression, looks down. How many times it's like being in first class, and you're the only one that don't ask for your jacket or coat? How many times it's like to be in first class, and then they don't even ask you to buy something to drink? They look like passengers. Or when they look at your ticket, if you happen to be in first class, they ask to see your ticket, assuming that you must be in coach. That's just getting here. That is just walking to this room. I was very struck with today when I was speaking to Don Barlow here, the American Indian gentleman who I just met. And he talked to me about that he did grief work. As he was telling me about this grief work, he related grief work to be the unresolved grief of racism. So I want you to hear that. Because it's a very profound statement to make. Because I saw earlier today somebody who was in their motorized cart trying to get up the staircase up here. Trying to turn the corner. You see, you can look at that and you can see something very physical. But right now, as you sit in this room, there are people sitting right next to you who are victims of racism. Maybe even just today. Maybe even just yesterday. And again here. You see, you can't see it. You think oftentimes the top corporations in America today, if they got this far, how could they be experiencing racism? Can anybody tell me, by a raise of hand, can you tell me what ethnicity is missing in the United States Congress, in both the Senate and the House of Representatives of the Republican Party as congressional aid? What ethnicity is missing in each of those houses? Anybody please yell out what ethnicity? The Republican Party for congressional aid, what ethnicity is not represented? Right. Good. How many of you know that there is not one single person of color as congressional aide for the Republican Party, the United States Senate, or the House of Representatives? Not one. Newt Gingrich was told over 9.5 months ago that there is not a single person of color. And Newt said, oh my God, shocked. 9.5 months later, after the Black Caucus alerted him to this loss, lack of representation, there is still not one single person of color as congressional aide in the United States Senate or the House of Representatives. You see, in his world, nothing is wrong. Nothing is missing. Just yesterday's newspaper, there is one country in the world the #1 country, industrialized nation in the world, leads the whole world in the number of children that are going hungry. What country is that? The United States has the #1 highest rate for children going hungry. Why is it then that just less than 8 or 9 years ago, Ronald Reagan said, nobody in America goes hungry? And yet 1 child in 4 is undernourished or is going hungry today at this very moment. You are eating, or perhaps even wasting this lunch as we are sitting here today. Because in our world, we don't have to see that. And that is what this film, The Color of Fear, was all about. It was about to show what's missing in this country. I would like to show you a good example of how that happens in this country right now. Would you please raise your hand if any of you have ever been at a school where 80% of the teachers are Asian? Could you raise your hand? Could you raise your hand if you've ever been in a school where 80% of the teachers are Latino? How about African American? How about Vietnamese? 80% of the faculty are Vietnamese. How many of you have ever been to a school where 20% of the faculty were teachers who were white? Only 20%. How many of you have been in schools where better than 80% of the faculty were all white? Raise your hand. You see, ladies and gentlemen, that is what is missing. I would like right now for all the people of color that are here at this conference, would you please stand? All the people of color. I would like to take a good look at these folks as they're scattered throughout all these tables. How many of you who are standing in your agencies, you are the minority? Could you please raise your hand? I'd like you to take a good look, folks. How many folks have their hand raised? They're not only a minority here, but even a minority in their own agencies coming in. What must it be like to always be in the minority? Thank you. Again, I would like you to remember just that name itself, minority. That actually I often tell people that all the people of color in this room are the majority. There is no such thing as minority assistant, it's majority assistant. The world is mostly people of color. And so much of the power, and so much of the opportunity is outside of their hands. I'm going to show you just a quick 5-minute excerpt of The Color of Fear. And I wonder, for those of you, how many of you have not seen the film? Please raise your hand. Well, good, you're in for a good little treat. And Cornel West calls this perhaps one of the most confrontive films on racism in the 20th century. He deals with a lot about the anger and tremendously about what is going on in this country this very day.
I am American.
My father is Mexican, my mother is Irish.
I'm a third-generation Japanese American man.
I do always want to be identified as African American or black. I'm at least seventh generation Euro-American.
Chica.
I am Chinese.
I'm Mexican.
African. I am an all-American man.
We're not Americans, even though we are.
The fear is still there because I know it can happen. Because it has happened, not to me. Another woman in the laundromat at another time came up to me with a $10 bill and waved it in front of me. She said, change, change, and she was enunciating very carefully.
We always look at you, baby. Always.
every day. You ride up here and say, oh man, where are we now? Oh God, I hate being out of the city because I know who's out here. You are.
I got excited when Mun Wah said to us, he is Chinese American. Why can't he be just American? And excited about being just American like David is.
The way, man. I worked in corporate America for a while, and now when I see guys walking down the street in a suit and tie, I'm like, phew, I bet he can't wait to go home and become a black man again. Walk through some halls with some pride, you're gonna scare some people. Show that you have some intelligence, you scare people.
You know what happens to me when I pass a mission? Not the same thing that happens to every group that passes a mission. It's chopping off hands, it's slavery, and it gets tiring to not have that difference known.
What is presented to me as an American does not look like me, does not think like me, does not cry like me, does not play like me.
I'm not American. I'm Japanese.
When you say that your ethnicity is American, there is no American ethnicity. You had to throw away your ethnicity to become American.
This film was important to show across this country because I felt that the media has often shown when people of color get angry, that it's uncomfortable, that it's inappropriate, that if we could just say it in a certain way, it would just be heard. But I've worked with people of color in multicultural groups for the past 15 years. And what I realized is that the LA riots was not a good example of anger out of control. The Los Angeles riots was a good example of what we do not allow anger to be expressed. When we don't acknowledge it, when we won't deal with it. And that's what this country needs to do. We need to begin to have that relationship. I've often told people that I thought that multiculturalism has often lacked two other things. We often think that multiculturalism is about representation. Just get enough people of color in a workplace, and then we have it. But the problem that we have in America today is that we get people of color, what we don't have is power to make decisions, to change and break policy, and to hire and fire. The second thing that we still lack in our workplaces in dealing with multiculturalism is that we don't talk about racism. Every single corporation agency in the United States has a diversity program about this big. And EEO complaints probably about a lot larger than that. Because we seem to think that diversity is good for once a year. Our conference is good for once a year. What I would like to see happen is, what would it be like if you went back to your workplaces? And what you did was every single week, at every one of your meetings, once a week, ask this question. How are we doing with racism this week at this agency? I'd like you to think about that. A major corporation in the United States, the president of that company just agreed that all his employees on Monday morning would stop work at 10 o'clock in the morning, pair up with somebody they didn't know, and ask this question, how are we doing with racism? I'd like you to think about how profound that would be. I recently did this one in one of the top companies, IBM, at one of the top 100 executives. There was only one person of color in the room. And I said, this is incredible. There's only one woman in this room, and only one woman is African American. I wonder what's it like for her being the only African American woman in this room. In fact, I wonder how many are going to walk out of this room or left this agency because of being the only person of color. Just as I said that, I remember it quite well. It was only 2.5 months ago. She stood up with tears in her eyes and said, you know, it's funny you asked that, Mun Wah. Because just last night I thought about leaving. Every one of those executives turned around. Not one of them knew she was not Not one single one had ever asked her, what's it like when you be the only woman of color in this room? I'd like you to think as you be here today, you've done this intense work. What are your next steps? If you are in your agencies, what would it be like to ask the people of color or women in your agencies, what's it like for you being here? What doesn't work and what do you need? from us, from this agency. The American Indians have a good saying oftentimes. They ask occasionally, are we headed in the right direction? One thing that's very important for agencies to ask, is our heart headed in the right direction? Do we meet the needs of the people from our communities? What else can be done? You know, when I saw the Rodney King tapes, how many of you saw the Rodney King tapes? Raise your hand. I'd like you to think about what happens if that were your child. And someone gave you a tape of your child being beaten by the police. Raise your hand if you'd be honored to get that tape. I'd like you to think about that. Because what if he had been killed? I would not want a tape of my child being beaten. What I would have liked is for that person to put that camera down and stop what's happening. You see, that's what we need to do in this country. Is not only to be a witness, but to say we won't allow it to happen. When we begin to find out that banks redline different ethnic groups, our women, we need to go to that bank, our bank, and say, I refuse to bank here anymore until you serve these people. When we're inside a grocery store and a person of color or someone in front of us is asked for all of their ID and we're asked for none, we need to say to that store owner, I refuse to be treated that way. That person deserves a right to have the same kind of credit check as I do. When the churches in America today here, the black churches of America, when the churches were burned down, that the churches, the black churches were audited, that their members were questioned. Every white church in America today needs to say, if you audit them, you audit us. If you do not audit us, you do not audit them. And to stand up. That is one of the things that needs to be done in standing up together. Not to go back to our friends and simply say, how horrible that every single month as of today, at least 2 or more black churches in America today are being burned down. Racism is alive and well. What we also need to do is to notice what is missing. I have never seen on television a person of color in a shampoo commercial or selling computers in America today on any media program or television station. I have yet to see an Asian family, a serious dramatic series on an Asian family, a Latino family, an African American family. Not a situation comedy, but a real life guts and hearts film about our families. Why is it that we're always being laughed at? Why is it that everything we say and do is a joke? Why can't we win? Why can't a white person die for us instead of we die for them? Why can't we save them once in a while and still come out alive? One of the most beautiful films I just recently saw was Get on the Bus by Spike Lee. I went so hard to get Black Girl Maker today, or an Asian one, or a Latino one, or an American Indian one today. Whoopi Goldberg is way off base. You look at the industry today, the media industry, it's just like a plantation. There are no people of color or women as first editors, first photographers, first sound, in anywhere. We need to go back in our communities when we make it to serve and to employ those people. European Americans, just like males, when women talk about sexism in America, we need to get together as men and talk about sexism. European Americans in this country need to get together to talk about what's it like to be European Americans. How many European Americans in this room know how to speak your native language? Raise your hand. How many do not? I would like you to think about that. Let me give you a good example of how well hidden that is in America today. Would you please tell me right now, if you can tell me the ethnicity, the European American ethnicity of Bob Dole? 80,000 people I've done this workshop for, not one single person in America knows Bob Dole's European heritage. Both men talked about the importance to respect differences in America. Not one single, neither Bill Clinton nor Bob Dole mentioned the European American heritage in any of their speeches to this day. Neither man talked about racism, but every man said, I honored differences. What is missing? Because I think that the reason why many European Americans don't know their heritages or their languages is exactly what happened to us. To get a home, to get a job, to get housing, to get education that had to be given up. Someone said to Lee Mun Wah, you know, you have Chinatown, you have the Mexican area. Don't tell me culture isn't honored in America. And I said, do you know how those got started? Chinatown is not the prime real estate in every city. Those areas were started because that was the only place you could be safe and not get lynched. That was the only place you could get homes, jobs. And ladies and gentlemen, that is still going on in America today. We need to take a stand. When I look back at the civil rights movement, I do not remember, you can tell me if I'm wrong, I do not remember one single march by European Americans on their own in the civil rights movement. I want you to think about that. Where were they? When we have the Million Man March in America today, the Latinos, the Asians are thinking about marching on Washington. The African Americans have just done it. They're thinking at their 1-year anniversary how wonderful it was and the impact that it had. In my last workshop, at the end of racism, one European American man got up and said, I want to end racism in America. And I said, wonderful. I'm all for you. And I gave him a petition. And I said, it's a million-man march of European American men to march on Washington. To say that they stand up against racism and sexism. And I'd like you to think about what that must be like. And he said, oh my God, you want me to sign that? And I said, yes. I would like to know right now in this room, how many European American men, by standing up, would be willing to march on Washington and say, I'm against racism and sexism in America, please stand. Let's give them a hand. We have over here a petition called a March for Hope. And we'd love you to be able to sign that. Now, I'd like you to think about, at this very moment, what was it like to stand up? Well, those 7 men stood up, and guess what happened? 1 week later, every man called up and said, oh my God, what have I done? Their families told them what a fool you are. I bet they want a lot more from you. Are you a fool? Wait till your agency hears what you're doing. One of the men went to a $1 billion company and told the president of his company that he had joined this march. The president of the company said to him, there is no such thing as white privilege in our company. He looked around the room, and they were all white males. And he tried to insist that the president was angry with him, and when he left, he called me back up, and this was his conversation. He said, Mun Wah, I'm scared. I'm 50 years old. I don't know if I've jeopardized my job now. I don't know if the Ku Klux Klan will come after me. My wife doesn't want me to do this. She thinks I'm going to cause too much trouble. Maybe I didn't do it right. Maybe my timing was off. Maybe I should have waited. And I looked at him and I said, now you know what it's like to be a woman or a person of color. something that's at stake every single day. See, that is an experience. You stand up. A month and a half ago, I received my very first death threat. Someone got to my family and wrote to us that the Ku Klux Klan now knows our home address, and it's on the internet. A broadcaster on the radio said to me, talked to me, and said, "Well, I bet that happens to you all the time." And he smiled and laughed with me. And I looked at him and I said, "Don't you dare do that. Because now my life will never be the same again." Do you know what it's like to know that your work could jeopardize your family and your children? It's not fun. I don't know if you're used to it. And it's not part of the terrain. It shouldn't be a part of our terrain of anybody in America. When Colin Powell wanted to run for the presidency of the United States, he quoted 2 reasons why he did not run. His heart was not in it, and family matters. And family matters was his wife did not want him to run because she was afraid that white America would assassinate her husband. Is that the American way? When I heard that, I was so sad. I was so sad in this election not to see a woman or a person of color running for the presidency of the United States. If I were to tell you in this room right now, for the next 50 years, the only one that will be allowed to run for the presidency of the United States will only be a person of color, would you vote? If I told you for the next 50 years that this conference will only be 90% people of color, would you come? If I told you in your agency and your schools that the only president of your company or your agency will only be a person of color, would you still work there? You see, that is a world that people of color experience every single day in London. And they're still told to have hope. They're still told to participate. What's your job to do when you leave here today? When you go back to your agencies, is to say someone's missing. Someone is missing in our agency. To sit down and begin to have this talk that is so important to begin. We cannot any longer simply honor diversity. We must live it. I would like you to think about in your neighborhoods, are there people of color? In your family, do you live in a neighborhood where you get to see people of color? Does your family have people of color over? Do your children know other families in your workplace? Will you stand up for them? Financially, emotionally, and professionally? You see, I know what it's like not to. My father never allowed us to bring any black folks into our house. But I remember when we sold our house and moved, an African-American student asked me to come to his home, and I came. I was really scared of all the things my father told me. And then we walked around the neighborhood, I said, God, this is where I used to live. And we came down my block, and I said, this is my same block. And then I remembered, I said, you live in my house. You invited me to your home. But I never invited you. You see, we need to make a personal step. My mother was murdered by an African-American man. I did not want to be a filmmaker. I did not ask to be a diversity trainer. I did not ask to come up here today. 11 years ago, an African-American man broke into our home. And he found my mother in the garden and shot her 5 times in the head. Terrified the last 2 years that I have come to speak again. I did this film so that people could speak of the horrors that happened. On that flyer, you'll see that I was a performing poet. I had never taken to the stage again. But I know that I must do something for my son. My son, at 3 years old, walked up to my wife and said, "You have beautiful blue eyes." Then walked up to me and said, "Daddy, you have beautiful brown eyes." And he looked at himself and said, "But I have beautiful black eyes." And he's brought them on. At the age of 5, my son came back and said, "I hate being this color. I want to be white." What happened? What happened to him? Every single Walt Disney film is so racist. Every crow, every monkey, every ape is an African American person. Every dignified, respectful leader is an English-speaking person with an English accent. Every time I look at one of those plates that depicts an American Indian person, like Pocahontas, why is it that she always has European characteristics? What has happened? The beauty of our cultures. We say that we honor diversity, and yet today, when I went to the United States Department of Defense recently, the commander said, "What the hell is that doing here?" I looked at the commander and I walked across the room and I put my hand on his shoulder. And I said, "Commander, why, it's to remind you what's missing. It's to remind you what's missing." I would like to look around this room right now. How many people in this room are wearing their native clothing? I would like you to think of one single ethnic perspective or practice that you have in your agency, that you use and practice. Think about that. We need to ask, what is the Native American, Latino, African American, Asian way of doing things? How can it be useful and practical in our agency? When we do that, we not only honor diversity, we honor the people in the room who are diverse. In closing, I would like to read you something from the film The Verdict, which I think was quite beautiful. It was when, in this film, Paul Newman knows that there is no chance that he has to win. So he faces the jury, this is what he said. "You know, so much of the time we're just lost. We say, 'Please God, tell us what is right and what is true.' When there is no justice, the rich win and the poor are powerless. We become tired of hearing people lie, and after a time, we become dead. We think of ourselves as victims, and we become victims. We become weak. We doubt ourselves, and we doubt our beliefs. We doubt our institutions, and we doubt the law. But today, we must remember that you and everyone who in this room is the law. Not some book, not some lawyers, not a marble statue or copies of any court in America today. You see, those are just symbols of our desire to be just. They are, in fact, a prayer. Sometimes a fervent and frightening prayer, but still a prayer. There is the same act as if ye have faith, and faith will be given to you. I believe that justice is always waiting for us. On the steps of government, to the people we work with, in our neighborhoods, and in this room and in our hearts. have faith in justice, we have only to believe in ourselves and to act with justice. If you are to have justice, you need to believe in yourself. You need to speak out against injustice. Act when someone is degraded, or abused, or underrepresented. It is time that we act as a family and live as a community. If we decide to, if we choose to, this country can have enough jobs, enough homes, enough food for all of us to share. You see, each of us in this room is the problem, and each of us is the solution. We can bring this country back home again. Back to a place where we live in harmony and respect. Each of us can be the American dream. The American dream will never be the American dream until every single one of us is representing every single agency in the place of America today. When that day comes, you and I can truly stand together. I'd just like to take a moment just to introduce two folks who are going to be, if you're interested in the work that not only with this film, but the work of Stir-Fry Seminars, we're going to be setting up a national training center right here in Spokane, Washington. For people who would like to not only see the first film, but also the color of fear and bring it to your schools and agencies. I'd like to introduce Mike and Jerry, and maybe they'd like to say a few words.
Thank you, Mun Wah. Quite a surprise. Get a microphone in your head. I'd like to say that as a Choctaw, a member of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, I was not looking for a guru or a leader for a cause. But last year I had the opportunity to meet Lee Mun Wah, and I saw in him an honorable and an ethical person that I wanted to be involved with. I saw in him a person that cared and that was a role model for me, because I didn't have those role models growing up of people of color in places where people would listen. And so I started a relationship with Mun Wah at that time, and that relationship has grown. And through that relationship now we offer to have him and his team come up to the Pacific Northwest, Spokane, to talk to us more in deeper levels about the understanding of these issues, these problems. If you'd like to come up to the front table, the men that stood earlier, and sign up for the march, we have that sign-up sheet. For those of you who would like more information about having stir-fry seminars put on, seminars here in Spokane, we can give you that information also. If you're using the film now, we'd love to talk with you and talk to you about effective ways to use this film in your organizations. We know that there are many copies out there. Many of my friends own copies of the films. If you'd like to not come up today and call later, you can reach us at 467-4592, area 509. And we'd be happy to spend some time with you on the phone, talking to you about these things. Thank you.
One more thing I wanted to say to you, and that is that we were just very lucky recently, is the United States Armed Forces has asked us to train all of the armed forces around the United States on diversity using the color of fear. And just a month ago, in November, the Dalai Lama has asked me to meet with him and his group for the next 4 days to not only show the color of fear, but to begin to work with them. And so this film is reaching out all over the world and all over the country. I need folks like you. I want to honor the incredible work that you're doing here, the time that you put in. So many people, like yourselves, are making a difference in this country. You are not alone. This country needs you. You are the heart and the soul and the voice of this country, and perhaps the great hope of this next generation. I once said to somebody, if we do not cross the country, across the streets, to bring our neighborhoods together, this next generation will cross the streets and change the face of this country to a place where it will become violent and separated. If I were to tell each and every one of you in this room that next week you will lose somebody, you will do something about racism. But in fact, we lose somebody every single day. But every single day you do your work and I do mine. A person is saved. A life is given. Thank you.
Mun Wah, thank you very, very much. We asked you to leave us with a challenge and send us on our way with energy and with a challenge, and you've certainly done that very much. I appreciate it very, very much. Just a couple of kind of concluding things. Gonzaga has been a wonderful host to us. Bob Bartlett is here. Bob has been the contact from Gonzaga to us. He is director of the Unity House. He has some other titles as well. But he's been on the planning committee, and I certainly want to thank him. But Father Glenn is also here, the president of the university, and I would like the two of them to stand and let us give you a thanks for your hospitality to us here. Appreciate it. You've been very gracious, and it's made this conference very successful. Thank you very much. Thank you all. We'll see you in Colorado Springs last weekend in September 1997. Amen.